Fox News Podcasts presents the Bret Baier Podcast with Fox News chief political anchor Bret Baier.
President Trump welcomed Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to the White House on Tuesday, the first trip the Arab leader has made to the United States in more than 7 years. During the meeting, the two discussed a potential mutual defense agreement and the sale of 48 F-35 fighter jets to Saudi Arabia, the latter of which the Pentagon has raised concerns about due to Saudi Arabia's close ties with China. Israel raised concerns as well. President Trump expressed support for the sale while speaking to reporters on Monday.
They've been a great ally. They've got to like us very much. Look at the Iran situation, what we did in terms of obliterating, we obliterated their nuclear capability. Yeah, I will say that we will be doing that. We'll be selling F-35s.
Meanwhile, the House of Representatives has voted for the full release of the Epstein files after a discharge petition reached the necessary 218 signatures to bring the vote to the floor. A lot to discuss here. Let's bring in our panel. Fox News contributor, Outkick columnist Katherine Ham, Fox News senior political analyst Juan Williams, and Fox News Washington-based correspondent Meredith. Katherine, this Epstein vote, not a surprise after the president threw his support for it. Right. But that was a shift, and that was a surprise. Now it heads on to the Senate, and then one would think on to the president's desk.
Yeah, I think transparency is the better part of valor at this point, and the president has been very clear that he would like to move on from discussing it, and perhaps this is the quickest way to do so. I think maybe saying this earlier would have been the quickest way to do so, but it seems we will have something. I don't know if this is how conspiracy theories end. The more information people get, they will make of it what they will, and often these things just end up metastasizing forever. But I think, look, there was a sweetheart deal for him the first time around. He's a very, very powerful guy. He had connections to many very powerful people. I do not think that these files are the decoder ring for all elite corruption, but I think it's good to be frank with the American people about it.
Yeah. Mark, the White House, the president has been kind of perturbed at some of the questioning about it, and has reacted that way.
Yeah, he gets downright angry. And to Katherine's point, I agree with her completely that this, no matter what the files, whatever eventually even comes out, there will still be people that'll say this isn't what we needed. There was more out there. What are you hiding from us now? For the White House, though, this is all about messaging. This is a huge distraction for them ahead of the midterms. They don't want this hanging over them. They want to talk about what they've been able to accomplish both internationally and domestically. And if questions keep popping up from even Republicans that are, what about Epstein? It's going to throw them off message. And the president was even, he's gotten quite angry with some of the reporters who've continued to ask about that, including in the Oval Office today with the Saudis, as well as up on the plane the other day down to Florida, where he really seems to be annoyed that this keeps coming up. But to Catherine's point, that this could have been addressed months ago. And now, obviously, with the House having to go on the record for it, the Senate's going to have to hold a vote. I still wonder if there's any chance he would veto it. I mean, they have the veto-proof majority in the House. Would they get that in the Senate? I don't know. He said he'd sign it, but my bet would that only be after a veto? I don't know.
Wow. I mean, it would be a turnabout again, Juan. I mean, you'd one turnaround and then another turnaround if that's what happened. But, the question is what is in here and what are we going to learn? And, to Mark's point, are we always going to have some element of either party saying, oh, there's a scrub going on of documents and the juicy stuff hasn't come out even, months from now?
Well, I think once you buy into a conspiracy, you're all in. And this has been fodder for conspiracy theorists on the left and right. On the left, clearly they see it as a weakness for President Trump. But on the right, it's what's fascinated me because this is the first time we've seen the president in a position where he thought he was going to lose that vote, Bret, on Capitol Hill. And I think to, get ahead of it is why he said, go ahead, vote to release it, go ahead. But, the history here is that he was trying to block that vote. And not only was he trying to block that vote, he was lobbying members of his base in Congress not to make the vote. And he absolutely has broken with Marjorie Taylor Greene, the congresswoman, to the point where she says, that he put her life in danger and he's radicalizing people against her. But I think that from the president's perspective, the question is about the Senate, and I imagine the Senate will be under pressure to pass it. And then to get to Mark's point, will he sign it? I don't know why he wouldn't sign it. It's his Justice Department and his Attorney General, Pam Bondi, who will make a decision about what comes out. And I agree. I don't see that no matter what comes out, it's not going to stop the conspiracy theorists from believing that Trump was trying to block this vote because he knows there's something in there that's embarrassing to him.
Yeah, but it doesn't explain why suddenly it's okay.
No, I mean, I think Mary Katherine said, he now sees himself getting ahead of this curve and making the case, well, I opened up the files. But as Mark said, even if you do that, the conspiracy theory persists.
Panel, we'll hold it right there. There is no conspiracy theory on what Saudi Arabia is doing. They are now going from $600 billion put into the country or invested in the U.S. to $1 trillion announced by the Crown Prince, MBS. Obviously, some sticky questions in the Oval Office. Again, Mary Katherine about Jamal Khashoggi, journalist who was murdered in the Saudi consulate in Turkey. Thoughts about the relationship and, the linchpin that Saudi Arabia is in the Middle East for kind of bringing the place together.
Yeah, I mean, this is some realpolitik, and it gets icky at times, I think is the technical term. I appreciate the ABC reporter asking tricky questions, because one of the great things about this country is that you can ask tricky questions of leaders of shady regimes in the White House and try to get answers for those questions. But look, I think what's interesting to me about this is that how much emphasis the president is putting on this relationship, and I think an attempt, obviously, to bring Saudi Arabia into the Abraham Accords, which was a signature accomplishment of Trump's first term, and interestingly, is a foreign policy accomplishment, as many of his accomplishments have been in the first year of his presidency, which to some extent not cuts against, but is not the top priority of some of his base and some of his constituency, which is this more restrictionist, isolationist group. And so him focusing on this place where he's having successes versus domestic politics, although certainly Trump can juggle many things at one time, I think is an interesting feature of this presidency. And as Juan was noting on the Epstein stuff, perhaps signals his desire to say, this is what I'm doing and I'm doing well, while this domestic front stuff is not going as well for me in the wake of the election a couple weeks ago.
Mark, in the Oval Office, the president did talk about having the discussion with the Crown Prince about the Abraham Accords, or as he calls them, the Abraham Accords. He said that it's not a commitment yet, but a good discussion down the road.
Absolutely. And that was the same with the defense pact that the president was talked about. Some of the reporters were pressing for more details of what is actually that include. We know about the fighter jets, but what else will we see? And instead it was kind of left on the sidelines, or maybe that'll be hammered out when the president and his team sit down for the more formal dinner. You can imagine there's additional discussions with Rubio, Besson, and these others about what will this actually look like. But you mentioned the Accord specifically. Obviously, the U.S. is looking for any additional partners they can find in the Middle East. They have relied so heavily on Qatar and being able to, boost whatever relationship that can provide. I would imagine they'd also hope to rely on the Saudis more as they are trying to bring some stability to the region. And the president still does believe that they are in a solid footing with what they've been able to accomplish in the Middle East. And if they can rely on the Saudis to help get that done, that would be huge. I do think the point that I think you brought it up in the intro, Brett, was that also these fighter jets, it is a huge deal that we're going to be selling them. And there are real concerns about other countries now gaining access to American defense capabilities by way of these jets. Will the Chinese gain valuable insight? Do you pay it? Obviously, this is allegedly, but could you pay somebody off to get access to the same kind of technology? I think there are going to be real questions because because this was something that was considered so controversial only a few years ago, and now you're basically hearing crickets from Capitol Hill about selling these jets.
Yeah. In the past, Juan, when we've sold fighter jets or other technology, we've sold them the dumbed down versions of our supercharged, weapons or jets or whatever. I don't know if that's the case with the F-35s, but clearly the president made a determination that this is what he wants to do, and it's good for the region and good for what his next step is to make a deal with Saudi Arabia.
I don't think there's any question here. I think you've seen the reluctance on the part of defense officials to have this sale go through because of just what you said, the fear that the technology then would get to people who, are viewed as our enemies, the Chinese. And also don't forget that Israel is not in favor of this. They've never wanted the Saudis to have any kind of military armament comparable to what the United States has given Israel to defend itself. But I think the president's larger or long-term view is if you are going to achieve peace in the Middle East, you have to have the Saudis in on the deal, recognize Israel. And part of that, from the Saudi perspective, is, well, we're reluctant to do that. There's a lot of opposition in the Arab world to Israel and to their treatment of Palestinians. So we have to talk about a two-state solution. And right now, the Israeli government is not open to that debate, that discussion. And it has been U.S. policy historically. But what we've seen from President Trump is he's trying to put all this on a fast track. And he got a win yesterday, by the way, in the United Nations when they signaled their support for a peace board that would demilitarize the Gaza Strip and do so under a leadership of guess whom? President Trump. He would be the chairman of the board.
Mary Katherine, it's not often we talk about a win at the United Nations or anything good in the United Nations from the Trump administration's perspective, but the president himself touted it, and it was a big win for the new ambassador there, Mike Waltz, and the administration to try to get that 20-point plan moved forward and the next steps in Gaza and making that communication to Saudi Arabia that we are on track.
For sure. And I think this is where you see the two sides of the Trump coin, where his boldness in a place in the Middle East and sort of a different way of looking things creates opportunities, even someplace like the UN, where you, as you note, we wouldn't often expect a win, certainly of this magnitude, that he can call his own. And of course, he's very happy to do that. The other side of the coin is that with a regime like Saudi Arabia, I think sometimes there can be a concern that the deal is first and foremost, and getting to the deal, and he likes to get to them, quickly often, is that what's coming, at what cost are we doing that? And that's the F-35 question. And what other risks does that come with? But I think largely, particularly in the Middle East, sometimes much to my surprise, both in the first term and here, it has changed the calculus in that region in really productive ways for him to think about things differently and for him to do things like having MBS at the Oval Office, which is a completely different lens on it than other presidents would have taken. And it can lead to really good outcomes sometimes.
And we will see all the investment and what next steps happen. Panel, thanks. Now for a bit of history. On November 18th, 1883, American and Canadian railroad companies implemented 4 continental time zones, the first step towards establishing the time zones we still use today. Before this, the United States had more than 144 local time zones, but as railroads became more prevalent in everyday life, these time zones became a scheduling nightmare for railroad companies, who had to list dozens of different arrival times for the same train as a result. Rather than wait for the federal government to create an official time zone system, the railroad companies took it upon themselves to create their own, though they would not be made official until more than 30 years later when Congress adopted the railroad time zones and put them under the control of the Interstate Commerce Commission. That'll do it for this week. You can hear more of this series at foxnewspodcast.com, wherever you download your favorite podcast. Make sure to leave a rating and a review. We want to hear from you. For Mary, Katherine Ham, Juan, and Mark, I'm Brett Baer. We'll see you next time. Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcast Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.